Let me introduce our moderator and panelists. Ron Calhoun is president and CEO of Palmer Donovan Manufacturing Company. Ron is also chairman of the NAW Institute for Distribution Excellence, the preeminent research arm of the NAW. Joining Ron are the fellow Institute Fellows, Mark Dancer, president of Channelvation, Brent Grover, managing director of Brent Grover and Company, Dr. Barry Lawrence, program director of the Thomas and Joan Reed Center for Distribution, Research, and Education, and program director of the Global Supply Chain Lab at Texas A&M University, and Michael Marks, managing partner of Indian River Consulting Group. I know all of these folks and the tremendous work that they do, and it certainly has been my honor to serve as a director on the NAW Institute board. I can attend firsthand to the outstanding trends research that come forth through the NAW Institute publications, and much of the valuable work that comes from these four fellows. In fact, collectively, they have authored 21 research studies for the NAW Institute. So let's turn it over to Ron, who will moderate this session and ask the fellows to share some of the transformative or revolutionary ideas that they would recommend to each of us to consider to ensure that our businesses are not left behind. Ron?
Thank you, George. It is truly my honor to be the current chair of the NAW Institute for Distribution Excellence, and also a distinct honor to have the four fellows here appear together in one panel. I don't know that we've had such shy and bashful people able to get together at one time, but we have a very tight timeline to go through, and we've got a lot that they have to share with us. We were challenged, I believe, yesterday by Jonathan in the fact that we now only have 11 months to transform our businesses in 2018. So, Mark, let's start with you. What are you hearing from distributor CEOs on their progress on digital tools and their digital strategies, and what is the mindset driving the charge today?
Excellent question. We have a new report out. It's the fourth research study and publication that we've done with the Institute on the adoption and use of digital tools. So over that time, sometimes I say I've been fortunate to do it because I see the trends, but I don't think trends is quite the way to think about it, right? Trends implies that we're all moving in the same direction at the same pace, heading for the same goal, and that's really not the finding, right? It's more diverse. What we find is that in this latest study, most of the distributor CEOs that we spoke with told us that they have a vision for how they're using digital tools or digital technologies to achieve their business objectives. That's great news. What's new is that as the distributors that had the most experience tell us that the use of digital tools opened the door for them to think about how to innovate their business model. And what comes with that is a new mindset. And that mindset is one of being a little bit more entrepreneurial in your business as you drive your business forward, going on offense, less on defense with digital tools. And we like to think of the term, as one distributor shared with us, as being opportunity seeking. Now, this is a significant change perhaps for distributor leaders, because I think that it's fair to say that as waves of change have happened and we've responded to forces and threats in the marketplace, sometimes the distributor response has been a little bit more defensive to focus on operational efficiencies, to protect our margins. That sort of thing is really important, but and distributors said to us, it's a fundamental shift in the way that we think about our business if it's about going on offense, finding opportunities, being more entrepreneurial. It's a challenge for the distributor and all the organization. The last thing that I've heard from distributor leaders is that they're developing foresight, which is their personal opinion about where their industry will go in response to the competitive threat of disruption and the things that distributors are doing. But they know they can't predict the future. As a distributor leader, it's important, though, that you prepare your company for the future so that you're ready when you get here. And so a number of leaders told us that their number one job, and they're actively, personally involved in, is developing the capabilities in their organization, meaning their people, their knowledge and their skills around digital marketing, digitally enabled sales, e-commerce. Analytics is huge. Web analytics is huge. And the idea is that if we can't predict the future, we at NAW need to be ready for it when it arrives. Direct involvement by CEOs and distributor leaders is a big part of that.
Well, thank you, Mark. We heard yesterday, tactics and efficiencies is not something we can focus on. So our focus as CEOs have to be a little bit different. Mike, let's turn to you. You've had some interesting criticisms of distributors and that put their IT department in charge of the digital transformation. Why is this a problem?
I'm going to be very polite, but it's often... First time, right. Well, when Peter Drucker talked about the knowledge worker, it's basically you're managing somebody who knows more about what they're doing than you do. So it's appropriate, the IT guy, the IT department, that they'll run all that. But the issue is just because a CEO doesn't really understand the need for a digital strategy, think of everything you heard about yesterday, you're not actually delegating it to the IT guy, you're essentially abdicating it. Because this transformation, if you go back to what Jim said yesterday, remember the metamorphosis? You're going to end up being a big ant sitting around waiting for wings, and everybody else is going to fly off and be gone. So one of the real issues, if you think about it, on the whole digital transition, and if you've been following what Mark's been doing with Ruth at the NAW in terms of this whole roadmap, how do you make a decision about, do I want to focus externally or internally? In other words, you have to get outside, look at what your customers are doing. Are you behind competition? If you are, that should be taking some of your resources so you can get caught up in terms of what your customers want. So it means you have to be external. That's not something that's in the core competence of most IT functions. The second thing is that if you're not behind competition, and we have internet transparency on pricing, and everybody's got all kinds of issues, so do you spend the money in digital process building so that you can lower your SG&A, so you can maintain the same growth in shareholder value and EBITDA margin with compressed margin? All of those things require CEO leadership because you're going to be changing the organization. You're going to end up with a vice president of customer experience, and most people don't even know where that fits. But it's really about being external and making the transition to digital. It's not an IT thing. And the best way, from my point of view, and the reason I get upset, as you know, Ron, about this sticking it in the IT department, it's a failure of vision. It's really about the CEO gets curiosity, and everybody's got to have skin in the game. What you essentially do if you want to win, and you talk about what Jonathan talked about yesterday, set yourself a goal as a senior executive that say, you know what? I'm going to get terminal curiosity. I'm going to go out and learn. I'm going to pretend, just tell everybody I don't know how this works, but I'm going to get every one of my senior executives involved. Everybody's going to have to go out and do it so we have skin in the game. And we want to get smart enough so that next year's NAW conference, do you remember how John talked about the story of Dot Foods and all the issues and the problems? He was up here talking about a lot of drama, right, in terms of how they built that foundation for the company. He's not pretending that we never made mistakes. He's saying this is how we confronted him. Grab a hold of it and just embrace it and say, you know what, by next year, I'm going to have an interesting story to tell about all the things we discovered. And that's completely different than the IT. And that's as calm as I can answer it.
Mike, thank you. It is truly a function that you have to have everybody involved with the digital process and understand the strategy. And we've heard, let's flip to Brent for a moment here. We've heard a lot over the last couple of days in the retail channel and changes that have taken place there. I know you believe there's a lot of distributors that must learn from what they see in retail. What do you feel are the critical lessons distributors need to learn from that?
Imagine we have this meeting going on here, but we're all executives in retail, and maybe it was 10, 15 years ago. In the room with us, we would have the executives from the Limited, Gymboree, Payless Shoe Source, Blockbuster, Video, Borders, Books, Radio Shack. We'd have some powerful, well-known, iconic companies. Well, before I try to get my message across here, and I'll try and be as polite today as you were. It's an effort.
It is.
I want to give you a little context from my own vantage point. I am bullish on distribution. I'm not a bear, but I'm bullish about distribution businesses that have basically what I would say 3 essential ingredients. One is some sort of a defensible moat, M-O-A-T, moat, have excellence in execution within their business, and are also fortunate enough to have a clear strategy and they're implementing it well. Now, those are companies I can get very bullish about. However, in terms of distribution, where I look at myself as sort of an activist investor, both as a former owner of a distribution business. I've been fortunate enough to be on the board of directors of several distributors where I had a little skin in the game and some good exits, and I expect that to continue happening. I believe it will. I also invest in distribution through private equity. So that's the bullish part. Here's the bearish part. Back to that distribution, that retail industry leadership meeting 10 or 15 years ago. Every company I mentioned in my comment before is no longer in business. And the observation that was made by a gentleman with the unusual name of Guru Hariharan, who's a former Amazon executive who runs a business in California called Boomerang, which is a profit advisory business for retailers, those who are continuing to thrive and be successful. Hariharan's observation was that once true internet commerce, this is business to consumer, of course, in retail, once that reached a 20 to 25% penetration point, for example, in music, in the culprit there, Apple Music, let's say, within 11 or 12 months, the biggest company you can think of in that business, retail-wise, was gone. They were Sam Goody and Tower Records. And in the video world, of course, Netflix was the aggressor, a company that has also reinvented its own strategy more than once. But Netflix was the aggressor, and the victim there, of course, was Blockbuster. And consumer electronics, the victim was Radio Shack, amongst others. It's unfortunate to say that maybe there's a canary in the coal mine, but I'm watching with great interest to see in our industry, once true internet seller, and I don't mean bricks and mortar distributors selling on the internet, I mean real internet sellers, once they capture a 20 to 25% share, when that will happen, I don't know, but it certainly won't be too long from now when that starts to happen. What will happen to some of the iconic wholesale distributors in our world who don't have a defensible moat, who aren't executing well, and who aren't implementing a good, clear strategy? So I worry about them. I'm bearish on them. And I'm also looking at maybe what we could learn, as you asked. Retailers, the ones who are successful, are gathering data on customer spending habits. Most of us are not very good at that. We're still, in many cases, exploring customer segmentation. I think companies have to move much faster on that. I think we have to think very strongly about redeploying our sales force. The data is in. MDM published a study last year that was done by Real Results Marketing. 36% of the respondents, distributor customers, said they would like to see a field sales rep no more than once a year. Some of them said not at all. Many of them said not at all. And that was a survey of 3,000 or 4,000 customers of real distributors. So I think we also have to rethink the way we comp our salespeople. Most of us still pay them to generate growth and not sales. rather growth in sales and not in profits. So that's a little bit of a smattering of information I think that we need to learn from distribution. I think we better learn it fast.
Good. So we get to the islands of profit that we heard of yesterday. You know, I've been in this business for about 40 years now, and our obituary was written when I first got into it that two-step distribution, you're nothing but a money-wasting middleman. Why are you getting into that business? But so disruption. Let me ask Barry. Barry, given the challenges we're facing from disruptors, how do you think we can leverage the younger generation, the millennials, the Gen Xers, to help us become more competitive?
You know, ever since I first started teaching at A&M back in the 90s, I would continuously hear about, you know, first it was the dot-coms, they were going to destroy us all, and then there was, as we went through the process, it always seemed like we were talking about the younger generation was going to fix things. They were going to come in, they were going to be the ones that weren't afraid of computers, then they were going to be the ones that understood the new technologies and so forth. Over that time, that proved not to be really a major emphasis. But there's something of a sea change taking place right now. And if you look at where the technology is going to take us, it's kind of, you know, in a lot of ways it's kind of obvious. It differs by channel and by environment. And there are some environments where it's going to be a great threat to disintermediate the value that a sales force brings and a traditional distributor brings. There's going to be others where there's virtually nothing and not much is going to change. If you look at the difference between and the variations along, they usually go into value-added services and value provided. That said, you start then looking at who makes the difference then? Well, it's going to be people. Because once you automate something in information technology, it automatically becomes a commodity. There's going to be very few commodity players. That's always the nature of markets. So if we're going to differentiate ourselves, it's going to be based on our people. How does that differ from anything that we've ever said in the past? I mean, we've always said our people make the difference. But you have to ask yourself honestly, are my people where they need to be the differentiating factor at this point? When we go and we visit distributors across all channels all the time, that's what we see, is we see still the same processes in place. Exact same ways to hire people, the exact same ways to train them, the exact same ways to develop them over time. When you see folks that are really on the edge, they're heavy into, that are doing really well, you see them, they're heavy into coaching. Executives are not delegating human resources. They're involved. They're actually down at the lower levels and understanding what's happening. At the university, we often, we have a group called the Talent Incubator Program, which is where we have undergraduates doing research for companies. A lot of people look at that and they say, okay, well, I get a research project, I get to learn things, and they like to give cutting-edge things to the undergraduate students because they figured that they'll bring innovative ideas, and they do. But that's not the real value. The real value is that you've got a 9-month internship with someone who's handpicked by the faculty. These are very likely future CEOs. And it is astounding to me how many times I have to call companies and say, if you don't make an offer, you're going to lose this person. So the CEO, vice presidents know these folks, but it gets down to the HR level and it's just another resume. You're probably going to be hiring fewer people, but you're going to be more reliant upon them. They're going to be involved in much higher level sales, much higher level transactions, much more value add activities. The technical capabilities of your customer interfacing people is going to have to rise dramatically. You're going to have to be more selective about who you hire. You're going to have to reach deeper into the hiring process and make sure that that runs well. You're going to have to make sure that you take them through their training, and then you're going to have a plan for retaining them afterwards, because retention on millennials, study said, was 1.7 years. Now, the best estimate I've heard is that if you flip a person in 2 years, it costs you $250,000. We can't afford that. The good news is, yes, this generation is different. They're different because they have to be. And when I say that, I mean millennials and Gen Z, whatever you want to call them. They're different because they have to be. They believe they should be lifelong learners because they should. And therefore, we have to be looking at constant development, constant look at who they're going to be, and then we're going to have to give them the ability to help us to go through the transformational change. Transformational change like this takes a long time. And I will tell you, as someone who has observed it for well over 20 years, that by and large, our human capital processes are broken or disastrous, is really the only way I can say it. We're churning out the same type of people to face an entirely different world, an entirely different marketplace. And the really sad message on this is the next generation is exactly who we need to transform the distribution world, because they see the world that way. What any of us sitting down with common sense can say is going to be the distributor of the future, that's who they think we should be now. In fact, if they're sophomores and juniors, that's who they think we are. And we're not who they think we are. I mean, we're not who they think we are. And if we bring them in, first off, we're going to spin them in all different directions, eventually disillusion them. And meanwhile, we're not going to respond to the competitive challenges. The workforce that's coming out is the right workforce with all the negativity that's been put on them. They're the right workforce. Our problem is our human capital processes.
Thank you, Barry. That gives us a lot to think about there. As we move forward, let's flip over to Mike for a minute. Mike, can you share a bit about your work on how distributors are managing the transition to the omni-channel model, and what does that actually mean anyway? And I think yesterday we heard the unit-channel model or something like that.
Well, it helps build a successful consulting company. Sometimes just make up a word and everybody's got to pay money to figure it out. It's actually pretty straightforward, and a lot of people get really confused about omni-channel, and don't think about it in terms of your own company. Think about it in terms of a customer, and just think about yourself. Sometimes a customer is going to want a field salesperson. Sometimes they're going to want to deal with inside. Sometimes they want to do things online. You can't put them in categories that this is an outside salesperson served customer, because it's situational. And the whole goal is that you want to be seamless in terms of how that customer wants to deal with you. They should be able to deal with you any way you want. The fundamental idea is sell to customers the way they want to buy. So here's a key piece of data, and this is the big stumbling block that everybody's got. Go take your 50 largest customers and look at everything that they purchased from you in the last 90 days. By SKU, just what did they buy? Go back another quarter and look at what they bought the prior quarter. And virtually everybody in this room is going to have a percentage in the high 90s where the products they bought this last quarter are the same products they bought the quarter before. You have extremely high repurchase rates. We're hanging up and we have this one assumption, and this assumption gets in the way of everything. And the core assumption that people have is that once you give a territory to a field salesperson and you give accounts to that field salesperson, especially big accounts, they keep them forever. That's an assumption. It doesn't have to be that way. Omnichannel says instead of it being about you, it's about the customer. So if you think about it, we're going through this huge transformation. You heard all kinds of really smart guys yesterday talking about the need to transform. But if you hang on to this one thing, I can't let go of the field salespeople, can't mess it up. You're right, we pay them wrong. Our capital processes, our human capital processes are terrible. So we hang on to this and we get stuck. Imagine insurance companies, everybody's buying things online. There's one insurance company that said, we're losing share to all these disruptors. You see them on TV. So they're actually taking a huge risk and upsetting all of their agents as they start to sell some things direct. They still want to go through agents. The agents are all really hostile. We're afraid of our own sales force. So think about developing an account relationship online. Everybody's sitting there. We're looking at customers coming in online. We use our field salespeople to be market makers, not market servers. They're very expensive. So they help develop the account. They make it sticky. You create value for that customer so that there's a high repurchase rate, but they bring other people in lower cost ways to manage that customer. As far as the customer is concerned, they still have availability of a salesperson, a field salesperson, if they need it, but it's situational. We're stuck that once they've got this deck, we're gonna put in Salesforce.com, we're gonna change the pay plan, and somehow that's it. You're trying to make an ineffective process efficient. I mean, that's fundamentally it. If you let go of that assumption and you start to figure out there will always be field salespeople, right? There will always be field salespeople, but they don't have to manage your repurchase rate and be market servers. They use digital processes, use different alternatives, makes it very flexible to the customer. If you let go of that one assumption and just start the dialogue in your own company, you're going to find all kinds of opportunities. You go to the doctor. Somebody that makes $10 an hour makes you fill out a bunch of forms. You go sit in the little exam room after you've frozen in the waiting room for an hour. A certified nurse assistant comes in. They take your blood pressure, ask you a bunch of questions. They tell you to turn off your cell phone. You stay there, you get colder. The doc comes in, asks you some of the same questions. Take 2 aspirin, call me in the morning. They've segregated the task based on the economic value. We have failed to do that. And we're hostage to the history, which is why we're, as an industry, challenged with this whole, the omni-channel thing is very straightforward. As soon as you let go of that assumption. And I know it's big, and I know it's hard, and I'm of the view that those people that end up being hostage to history are going to be market share contributors to the people that embrace the human capital processes and change. I'm as bullish on this, actually all of us are, in the future of distribution, because those people that are going to be failing are creating all that market opportunity is going to go to those people that thrive. We're coming into a decade of real excitement if you don't get hostage to history.
Mike, thank you. So take the non-value-added services that a salesman's offered and turn it into value, correct? Mark, let's get back to digital tools that you spoke of earlier. Mm-hmm. Are you hearing from suppliers about distributors' process on digital tools and the impact on the manufacturer and distributor partnership, and how is that?
We shared in the last research report we did, we shared some of what distributors are telling us with suppliers and asked them what they thought about that. And we heard 4 words: hopeful, helpful, skeptical, and if they're brutally honest, ambivalent, right? So the hopeful side of it is that distributors are an important channel for manufacturers, and they really want distributors as a channel to modernize, to use digital tools and remain relevant and remain effective and efficient for taking their products and services to market. A few are helpful. They put people and teams in place to actually work with distributors, because the value chain is a partnership of manufacturers and distributors together serving customers. They're skeptical. Distributors tell me that they don't think they've made a lot of progress, really. Manufacturers think they've made even less progress, right? And if they're really, really honest, they're ambivalent, right? And they're ambivalent because sometimes they don't really recognize us until you get into conversation with them, but they have choices. If we don't all modernize and some of us go away, they can work with the ones that survive. They can use digital tools to create a direct relationship with customers and even maybe take orders if they want to. They can embrace Amazon. They don't necessarily want to, but if Amazon becomes the marketplace, they will embrace it. And so what this means is that as the distributor-manufacturer partnership needs to evolve, as the value chain evolves, distributors need to take the lead in telling your stories to manufacturers about yourself, your best suppliers, and through their associations and groups as a whole. And I'd offer this sort of context that I heard from one distributor to kind of put this in the frame of disruption. This distributor thought that Amazon doesn't really care if any one of us or 10 of us or 20 of us in this room go out of business. That's not their goal. They don't care. What they want to do is to move enough of the value chain, manufacturers and distributors, to their online marketplace so that they can dominate. It's their world. They set the rules. They control things. They decide what partnerships are. If they do that, what's left in the value chain, traditional value chain of manufacturers and distributors working together to serve customers, will be severely impacted in reputation and effect by what Amazon chooses to do. And if manufacturers are ambivalent, right, if they really don't care because they can wait and see what happens, they can't control the future, we as distributors need to take the lead in saying things like, practical things, how should the manufacturer discounts and rebates change to motivate us to do the right things, and how do we share information in new ways? Who leads, right? How do we work together? All those traditional things that good manufacturers have thought were their job and their channel programs to define that, They may not be doing that. So we need to do that as individual distributors and as groups, and try to set the terms for how the partnership is going to work going forward.
Well, thank you. We need to push our manufacturers.
Hard.
Brent, this event is sponsored by SPA, Strategic Pricing Associates, and you've spent some time on pricing. Tell us about your work and what is pricing disruption happening in distribution today, and how do you see it?
Okay, I'll try to be brief because I know we don't have a lot of time left. I think what's happened in pricing, and I'm going to harken back to retailing a little bit just for a moment. There was a truce, if you will, in retailing for many years. You would go to a department store, you saw a price for an item, you would either pay the price or wait for it to go on sale. And that evolved actually in the mid-1800s with companies like Macy's, where they started to put price tags on products. Wholesale distribution had a bit of a pricing truce, I would argue, between suppliers, distributors, and customers for many years. We had column pricing, bracket pricing, price lists, manufacturers suggested prices. We had some elements, at least, of consistency with pricing in wholesale distribution. I think the pricing truce, as in retailing, in wholesale distribution has also been broken. I think it's partly been broken by the advent of the transparency of pricing on the internet. But even more so than that, we many times going into the field now with products don't even know what the cost of our product is because of sheltered income programs, growth rebate programs, and all sorts of essentially opacity that's been created. When we used to tell our salespeople in one form or another what the cost of their product was, because that's what they used to determine the sell price. And now I think in many cases we can't even tell them that. And to me, the overarching issue here is the shift of power to the customer, away from the distributor and away from the supplier. Yeah. And we panic a bit and fight with each other over it. But the reality of it, I think, is power shift to the customer, because the information has made the customer really much more powerful in all this. And at the same time, we're still relying on our traditional, many of us, self-directed sales force out there on a compensation program that mostly encourages them to generate volume. So I think all of the tactical stuff we might do, pricing strategy programs and other techniques, negotiation training, all great tactical ideas. But the reality is, as long as we have this self-directed sales force and we don't give them the information they need to do the job, and actually even as we've removed the order-taking job away from the salespeople and we've removed the information transmission job, I think we're also gradually, if not all at once, going to determine the pricing job from the salespeople. And it's really a question of the companies in wholesale distribution regaining some of the control and making their sales force less self-directed and more management-directed.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, we're coming to the close of our time, so I'd like, we've got about 45 seconds for each one of you to give us one key takeaway or action item, and we'll start with Barry. Barry?
So I would say that right now what we're facing is we're facing a world where the interaction of the sales force together with the systems are fairly straightforward. ERP systems have been with us for a while. Those systems need, if you haven't finished getting your ERP house in order, you need to do that quickly. E-commerce is simply an extension of your sales order processing system. It's relatively simple when you think about it, although it has a lot of marketing capabilities and things of that nature. But then when we layer on top of that business analytics and how those will be used and their interconnection with the inside sales force, it's unlikely we're going to have armies of business analysts. It's more likely our inside sales force is going to be our business analytics team. And then finally, what are we going to do with our outside sales force? As far as the outside sales force is concerned, what's going to be their role? Chances are, as several of my colleagues up here have referenced, they're going to be more about creating new value add within the marketplace. And so as you look at that scenario and how that's going to play out within your particular channel, you've got to give serious thought to the sales process. Unless your plan is to go fully commodity, do it all e-commerce, and go head-to-head with the Grangers and Amazons of the world, which I don't think most of us want to do. It's all going to be about what are we going to do with that sales process? How are we going to bring in the right people? I was at a meeting yesterday, and we had a discussion about the high level, what the outside sales force type thing, a high level sales, people that take 5 to 20 years to develop. And I asked how many people we had in that place. And the answer was none. And and they said, we know we need to develop them. And I said, who has the skill set to develop those people? And the only 2 people in the room who could raise their hands were presidents. It's not unique. So we have to move through this process to differentiate ourselves with the talent of our people. That's what I think should be on everybody's mind.
Okay. Mike, he just took 20 of your seconds, so.
Mine's simple. Anticipation anxiety is bigger than event anxiety. Think about getting a root canal and you're nervous about the appointment. When you get there, it's a lot easier. It's the same thing. Just engage this. Decide by the end of 2018, you're going to be way smarter. Do what John did when he talked about Dot Foods. Engage those problems. Don't duck them. And you'll have a lot more fun. Play it to win instead of playing it not to lose.
Thank you. Brent?
Don't try to beat the Giants at their own game. They can do things that you can't do. Design your own game.
We need to get the word out about what we are doing to innovate and modernize our very significant and large share of the economy. We need to tell our suppliers, our manufacturers, and our customers. I was in a meeting in the Commerce Department recently. There's a group that had responsibility for tracking and encouraging innovation and modernization of our economy. They had 1 million examples. They were all manufacturers. They were all technology. I asked if channels, distributors were on their radar screen. They said, well, Amazon is doing stuff. So we need to get the word out.
Great. Thank you. Let's thank Mark, Brett, Barry, and Mike for their wisdom and their participation here today. And let's give it for our NAW fellows.